A film is only ever as good as its script. That's a line that I've heard in every single film class I've ever taken over the past 5 years, and it rings true ultimately. A movie can have a stacked cast, some gorgeous cinematography, and a great score, and still turn out to be trash. When it comes down to it, a good script can withstand bad acting or bland cinematography, but great actors and great shots just can't save a terrible script. Now, that begs the question, what makes a good script? Well, there are many basic guidelines that outline what we've seen so many times before. The general one that shapes so many stories is called the hero's journey. It goes a little something like this. The story begins with the hero living in their ordinary life before an inciting incident calls them into something bigger. However, this unknown is vast and nerve-wracking. It's not something they're ready for, so they hesitate or even reject it entirely. Eventually, something pushes them further, whether it's the death of a mentor or a family member or something of the sort. The hero steps into the unknown and faces new challenges, meets new people, and eventually faces the big bad who they defeat, and they return to their regular life. It doesn't necessarily fit every story, but it's the general formula for things like Marvel films. Tony in Endgame quite literally follows this exact formula. But it's also in Star Wars, and you can find aspects of this in pretty much everything. Does following this basic structure make a story inherently good? Fuck no. This is a guide. It's up to the crew to fill in what actually happens, and to make sure that the audience can connect to it. See, I'm of the opinion that you can have the coolest set pieces, the most incredible fight choreography, an all-star cast, stunning visuals, but none of that matters if the project is missing one thing: depth. Specifically, character depth. A story means nothing if it has no point. I think character depth is a lost art form, and I keep getting burned every time I get excited for something. Like, when Thunderbolts, or the new Avengers, came out, I was lured into a false sense of excitement because of the audience reception to the film. See, literally everybody and their mothers on my Twitter page were talking about how profound the film was. How it had a real through line, some real development between the characters, how everyone was chosen for a reason, and how the film was one of the best Marvel movies ever made. So I got excited. This was at a time where Marvel films were at an all-time low. The things that made these movies special, the characters, were barely an afterthought. The last great Marvel film was Guardians 3, but that was the exception, not the standard. We had such bangers like Multiverse of Madness, where character arcs were so non-existent so they could shoehorn in cameos and plot holes. Then there was Quantumania, a film that promoted a real character arc, one where Scott would work with Kang under the impression that he could regain lost time with Cassie. A very interesting premise, in the same vein as Huey in Season 3 of The Boys. Except, when the movie came out, that character arc was noticeably not included. At all! So, when I heard that Thunderbolts had a focus on the characters, I was really looking forward to it. But then I watched it, and the movie was the most surface-level, creatively bankrupt exploration of depression. I can barely call it a character arc. So, the point of Thunderbolts is that these lost souls, who are all lonely and longing for something to give them meaning, come together to overcome depression. The movie starts with Yelena monologuing about how empty she feels, doing the same things over and over again, all the people she's hurt, blah blah blah, and then nothing. Until her breakdown near the climax. The fact is that the entire point of the movie can be summed up in 3 scenes. Yelena's monologue at the start, her breakdown near the climax, and then the group hug in the void. And you may think I'm oversimplifying it, but I'm being so real. These are the main scenes. There are very small moments where other characters get to be real, like when John considers jumping down the elevator shaft, or his look when everyone finds out how shitty his life is. But that's it. None of the other characters get this focus at all. We get a shame room for Valentina when she's barely in the movie, but we can't be bothered to spend time showing the team growing to trust each other, or more scenes with them suffering, lifting each other up, bonding. I can understand why people believe there's a proper message here. The movie attempts to say something. It's about toxic coping mechanisms and finding people who share your pain to save you from the voids of your mind. However, that message doesn't land when the movie doesn't reinforce it. 2 scenes isn't enough. Every time I hear this movie praised as one of the best and most emotional MCU films, I die a little inside, and that has led Thunderbolts to be one of my least favorite Marvel movies. In the end, it's a decent film on its own. At the very least, it does try to say something, but it gets glazed for the bare minimum, which I can't stand. The worst part is that Marvel is above this. Even in a movie with over 20 main-ish characters from across the franchise, there was still time in Infinity War to establish Thanos as a real character who has to decide whether to put his daughter above his conviction to save the world. Star-Lord pulls the trigger on Gamora at her request, only for that choice to be robbed of all meaning when Thanos takes her and tosses her off the cliff in Vormir. Thor loses his best friend, brother, and half his people are genocided at the start of the movie. He's on a warpath for the entire runtime, and Tony has been having panic attacks about this moment for 6 years. The characters have stakes in the plot, and they face hard choices that impact their characters and what decisions they make, not only later in this movie, but also in future films. It's really disappointing to me that they decided that spectacle was more important. This isn't just exclusive to individual projects either. Ms. Marvel came out in 2022. One of the main arcs in that show is Kamala and her relationship with her parents, wanting some freedom, wanting support for her hobbies, but there's just so much distance between her and her parents. But the story culminates with Kamala asking her family for help, and her mother handcrafting her superhero suit, signifying that they understand each other and that their relationship has grown stronger. The final shot of the show is Kamala swapping places with Captain Marvel, teasing The Marvels, which came out in 2023. And in this movie, Kamala gets a new suit, which has no personal ties to her, her family, or anything. This is another big problem that has been a thing since the start of the MCU, and it's that superheroes get new suits in every new film or season because it sells. It gets people interested and it sells toys. Companies are more interested in what they can sell you than carrying over anything of value from their previous projects. Why make a sequel that has any meaning when you can make one, change everything, craft a new look, and call it a day? I have similar feelings about the newest Superman movie. In July, as both Superman and Fantastic Four were promoted, I found myself getting more and more excited for Superman. A movie about hope at a time where the world is filled with nothing but despair. And it's by James Gunn. What could go wrong?
I screw up all the time, but that is being human. And that's my greatest strength.
Oh. Yeah, I was planning on making a full video about this movie, but truthfully, I was so disappointed that I just couldn't bring myself to talk about it till now. This movie was a painful watch because all the time that could have been spent establishing characters was spent expositioning. And just like Thunderbolts, the 2 main messages are both exposition dumped and not focused on throughout the movie. Like, okay, the 2 main ideas are you are who you choose to be, and that Clark is just as human as everyone else. Let me break these down one by one. The first one, choosing who you want to be, is a good message, but the problem is that it's the culmination of practically nothing. See, the basis for both of these arcs is the reveal that Clark was sent to Earth to spread his Kryptonian genes and essentially create a new Krypton with him as king. This turns the public against him, and the world sees him as a villain, and it quote-unquote causes Clark to second-guess his purpose. Now, I want to emphasize those quotes, because Clark has like 2 moments of doubt. Almost immediately after this reveal, Clark turns himself in and ends up in Luthor's pocket dimension, which is where he is for a lot of the film. While there, he doesn't have to question anything. He sees cut and dry that Luthor is evil, Krypto is being tortured, and he doesn't have anything to question. He needs to stop Luthor and save Krypto, Metamorpho, and Baby Joey. Once he escapes the pocket dimension, he talks to Pa Kent, and they just dump the message as clear as day. But like I said, Clark isn't grappling with this for most of the movie. This through line doesn't land because there is nothing supporting it. Then, there's this terrible climax. Clark has this exposition dump affirming a character arc that he didn't have, and not only does it fall flat because it's an arc that was non-existent, it also gives off the wrong lesson. Because this is Clark completely rejecting his Kryptonian history, something that is very important to him in most versions of the character. James Gunn called this a classic immigrant story, but I didn't know that meant the general immigrant has to reject their culture when they immigrate somewhere. These aren't my only qualms with the film. It's an exposition nightmare. Any characterization for all of the characters is given through dialogue instead of actual character work. Like, Lex's intellect isn't shown, it's told. He recreated the Big Bang. He stalked Clark and stole a strand of his hair, all off screen, because we need to fast track certain things instead of telling a real story with real people. James Gunn said that he wanted to have a separation between Clark's life and Superman's life, which is why he had the crew of the Daily Planet and the Justice Gang. Except, Clark interacts with the Daily Planet crew once, and it's at the start of the movie. He spends the rest of the movie as Superman, and still, he doesn't have a character beyond, I see the value in everyone. This isn't even DC's only blunder. There's also the Flash movie, which completely and utterly butchers the entire point of Flashpoint. Flashpoint, the comic, the animated movie, even in the show, is about the butterfly effect and about moving on from a past that haunts you. Thawne killing Barry's mom made him who he is, pushed him to become a CSI, and it pushed him to become the Flash. In the film, Ben Affleck's Batman has a really touching speech about how the past makes us who we are and how we need to be able to live with it and move on.
These scars we have make us who we are. We're not meant to go back and fix them. And there's nothing broken with you that needs to be fixed.
This is reinforced by Barry changing the past and seeing how much worse everything can be just by making one simple change. So, that leads him to put everything back to normal, and nope, never mind, he didn't learn his lesson. I think it's even more creatively bankrupt to have a theme, portray that theme, and then completely contradict it in the final scenes of the movie. This shows that the writers and producers understood the themes, they just didn't care. And to be completely real, you can see this kind of bullshit everywhere. You can have the groundwork completely laid out for you, and still fumble. This is evident in the movie adaptation of Dear Evan Hansen. If you guys don't know this one, it's a story about Evan Hansen, a high schooler who is essentially adopted by a family when they mistake his therapy homework as their late son's final words. This spawns a series of events where Evan lies about being friends with their son, and spins a tale about a budding friendship that never existed, just so that he could feel the love from a family he never had. Obviously, this is a pretty fucked up scenario, and if you're going to make a story where the protagonist is so obviously the bad guy, then you need to be prepared to make sure people understand that he is in the wrong. The story started off on Broadway, and in the play, Evan's true role is emphasized in two main ways. One is in the song Sincerely Me. This is a song where Evan is quite literally controlling the narrative and puppeteering his dead classmate. Obviously, the song itself is quite sinister, hidden within a very catchy tune, singing about reinventing yourself if you put your mind to it, as Evan reinvents Connor to fit his needs. Anyways, aside from the clear metaphor, the choreography also enforces Evan's control. During the first chorus, Connor's solo, he does a series of moves at the end of each line which match the rhythm of the song. If you pay attention, you can actually see Evan doing the exact same moves from behind his laptop. Evan is controlling everything from Connor's words to his fucking dance moves. There isn't a single thing here that Evan isn't manipulating. The other way that the play reinforces Evan's manipulation is by directly calling him out for all of it. I'm gonna go on a little side tangent here, but I promise this is important. One of the last songs in the play is called Good For You, and it's everybody calling Evan out on his bullshit. His mother calls him out for abandoning her once he saw something better for himself, and he's called out for stringing people along to get what he wants. The play mixes arguments that Evan actually has with his own conscience, creating a scene where Evan is just being berated by the people around him and his own mind. These are important details, and hell, even a whole musical number that is dedicated to portraying the entire point of the story properly. See, a really interesting thing to think about is why Evan is being called out in this song. Like, yes, on the surface, the song is calling him out for valid reasons. He spends all his time with a different family because they give him the attention he wants, and he doesn't even care about his own mother, who is busting her balls to provide for him. His classmate, Alana, points out inconsistencies with his story, and his friend Jared threatens to tell everyone that Evan's lying about being Connor's friend. But looking deeper shows that all of the characters have their own flaws, and their own reasons for not being entirely right to call Evan out. His mother is rightfully upset that Evan is letting other people fill in as his family, but it's also very difficult for Evan to have to live with a mother who's never there because she has to work so hard. Alana notices Evan's lies, but Evan points out that she's also benefiting from the whole situation, making them both hypocrites. Then, Jared threatening to expose Evan would require him to expose himself, as he helped Evan set all of this up. On the surface, the song calls Evan out for all of his terrible behavior, but reading into it, the song is the entire point of the show. The human psyche, how everybody is flawed. There are multiple morals to this story. Human flaws, the need for connection, how destructive lies are, and how important it is to be yourself. Most of these themes only come through when the material is aware that Evan is wrong to do what he's doing. This is where we transition to the movie. A movie that had the entire groundwork laid for it, yet somehow derailed through some of the most mind-boggling creative decisions that I've ever seen. Going in order of my points, let's start with Sincerely Me. The problems with the movie version stems from one main thing, in my opinion: the need to make it funny. So everything got exaggerated, and they turned it into a kind of comedy set piece where every time Evan and Jared change part of the email, they cut back to the beginning of Connor's action. Now, it is funny, but the problem with this comes once they reach the chorus. Instead of seeing Evan puppeteering Connor, it's just Connor dancing in a library. It completely removes the visual representation of Evan being the puppet master. But not only that, the movie takes every opportunity to try to make Evan seem better than he really is. In Sincerely Me, and in the whole movie really, Evan's tendencies are downplayed, and they force him into this sort of meek, awkward persona, which, like, yes, he is awkward, but they push it way too far. Compare the Broadway recordings with the movie.
This needs to be perfect. These emails have to prove that we were actually friends. I'll do it.
Look, if you can't take this seriously...
calm yourself, honey.
I just want to get this over with.
Very specific. Shut up.
Very specific.
Shut up.
Smoking drugs. Just fix it.
Smoking drugs.
Just fix it.
If I stop smoking crack. Crack?
If I stop smoking crack.
Everything he says is made softer, or plagued with artificial voice cracks to make people feel bad for Evan instead of letting him be a complex person who is taking advantage of this situation. But not only that, they completely cut Good For You, which just removes any complexity from the narrative because it no longer calls Evan out until he reveals it, which again is meant to make him look better. These choices actively damage the point of the story. Instead of seeing how flawed everyone is, they go to great efforts to make sure you like Evan, despite his emotional warfare on a grieving family. The director has gone on record to say that the songs were cut to make sure we experience the story from Evan's point of view. So it was a deliberate choice to water down the point of the story so that Evan would look better, and that betrays the moral of the story, the character arcs, and it makes a film adaptation that nobody really cares for because it pales in comparison to its source material. But not only that, you know what they do with that extra runtime? They added new solo tracks for the other characters! One for Alana and one for the real Connor. Alana's is essentially just a character inspection, which removes any questions about her motivation, which gives her less depth. Not that it matters, cause Good For You was cut anyways, but still. The Connor song is actually good, and it replaces the ending of the play, which I think is a much better ending, sitting with the real Connor instead of Evan's fabrication. The addition of these character-focused songs are a good thing. Good stories have strong characters, but the problem is that they cut out every other character-driven song except for Requiem. There are far more things to criticize this movie for, but really, the reason this movie sucks is because it fundamentally destroyed everything the story aimed to portray. It's really disheartening to see the way character depth is discarded. And it's more disheartening when I see the general audience glaze movies that either have no thought at all or portray terrible messages, intentionally or not. We used to make things that meant something. You'd have movies like The Sixth Sense, telling stories about connecting with people, facing your fears, and moving on from what's holding you back, moving forward instead of being stuck in the past. And it's handled with much more grace than Volcano Neck over here. Movies like Up, where the opening montage sets up everything about the movie. An old man who was once in love loses his future child and loses the love of his life and grows bitter. But then he meets Russell and he gets a second chance and finds new purpose. And lets go of his past. That seems to happen a lot. There were character studies of how pride ruins you, the lengths people will go for their children, about fighting for a better world even when the world shows you nothing but pain, or how that ugliness can corrupt someone who is supposed to stand for good. There's so much to be said about so many things, but instead, we get things like sacrificing yourself to end the cycle of abuse that you faced instead of fighting to make a better world. Or getting an overpowered Jedi who didn't have to train or face any real challenges to become the best. And when they try to say something interesting about how you don't need to have a special heritage to be strong, it gets retconned in the next movie. Or you set up a villain whose main shtick is manipulation and mind control so he can get what he wants, and then reveal that he was a cult leader. But in the second last episode, you reveal that his backstory has almost nothing to do with manipulation. But instead, he's just a murderer, and he killed to get where he was in life. 'Cause that's just so fitting! In modern media, you're expected to consume what you're given with no questions asked, when so much of it is the creators throwing things at a wall and completely misunderstanding their own characters and themes. Like, genuinely, how do you set up a commentary about how toxic and manipulative social media can be, literally spearheaded by a man with a TV for a face, and then reveal that his backstory is just murder? How do you betray your own message like that? You had to set it up just to do a complete 180. That's not to say that all modern media is like this. There are some good examples of recent movies that have things to say, or characters to explore. Invincible Season 3 has one of my favorite arcs about the morality of killing villains. Even Marvel actually succeeds in some cases, with Daredevil Born Again, despite being Frankenstein together, trying to say something about fighting against the corruption that the citizens of New York allowed for themselves. The Amazing Digital Circus is really interesting, exploring the lives of people who are trapped in the game. If there's no way to escape, if they're nothing but their digital bodies, are they still alive? Is there meaning to be found there? And my favorite part is exploring Jax as a character, a man who latches on to the idea that there is no meaning, so that he can push everyone away and never let himself get hurt again. Someone who is so damaged that he risks their one chance at a possible escape because he is afraid of going back to the real world, even though the prospect of escape was just an illusion. It's It's honestly kind of upsetting to think about all the missed potential in modern movies, and the fact that some of these undercooked, lackluster films get paraded around as if they're profound. They're not. They're pale imitations of things that have been done before, when we should be getting better at this, getting more creative, telling more stories, saying things. Kids' movies are integral to teaching kids lessons, simple lessons, or even ones that are more difficult, like Inside Out teaching people about living with sadness. What do we do when the next generation of kids' movies say absolutely nothing? What do we do when media literacy goes down the drain because everything is either shoved down our throats or isn't there to begin with? Character arcs, nuance, depth, these are all things that are genuinely important, not just to make things more entertaining, but to teach lessons, to sharpen minds, to make people think. And without that, we're just as bad as the slop we consume.